board. And what they have suggested is that we just hold off and give some time, get to know the individual and the members of the congregation, to observe and become acquainted with them for at least 6 months, and longer if you feel that's deemed appropriate. Another safety key is no child left unsupervised at any time. And I have worked with our Adventist risk management attorney for some time, and he has told me that the biggest issue with claims that might come from a situation that a difficult situation that may have arisen with a child is the supervision. That the lack of supervision is what created that moment of time that created a difficult situation. So supervision is critical, key, huge, significant. Another suggestion and recommendation, and really maybe stronger than that, is 2 adults at all times. To have 1 adult with a room full of kids, or 1 adult with 1 kid, it just creates dynamics that we need to avoid. So a safety precaution would be to have 2 adults at all times with the children. Never 1 child and 1 adult alone, or a child and child alone. And again, that's where the supervision comes in the 2 adult rule. So some guidelines to consider, but when you're working with children and your volunteers are, maybe you're doing some training with them, you're having a Sabbath school council meeting with everybody, some of this information might be helpful to share, and just reminders for us about the current realities where we are. Appropriate positive interactions are essential. Provide tuned in, constant supervision and monitoring. And I know that is hard to do. That is hard to do. It takes intentionality and planning, and somebody doesn't show up at the last minute and you gotta scramble to find some help. But that's key. Appropriate verbal communication can include praise, positive reinforcement to the child, and connection. A kid, I remember, I'm sure all of you remember adults in our childhood who had an impact. We knew that they cared. We knew that they took an interest in our well-being and in our learning, just the beauty of becoming closer to Jesus and helping us take that walk with him. So that praise, positive reinforcement goes a long way with our kids. And I'm not, I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys could really be the ones doing this seminar, but these are just a few pointers that we've picked up along the way. Appropriate physical communication, pats on the back or shoulder, being careful not to overstep, and being alert and aware to the physical connection of just a pat, or letting them know that you are there. So another factor and another key element that Adventist Risk Management North American Division, and I should stop here for a minute, Linda, and just ask if are there any questions, or is there anything on the chat that we need to, I'm just kind of moving right along without considering input that people may have. Nope. All right, we'll just keep going. Just interrupt me if something is needed. So Sterling Volunteers started out as Shield the Vulnerable. I don't know if you guys remember that screening program that we had a few years back, and it worked really well for a little while, and then the issues started coming up that couldn't be resolved. So the NAD changed it to a new company called Sterling Volunteers, and they provide the online training where you log in to the computer and you go through a training session and it asks questions. And then it also includes a background check. So I think this is a phenomenal program that we have been provided. And let's just talk about a few things regarding this. It's designed to screen, train, and select volunteers. It begins with the church board. The local church would make a decision on, they may wish to provide a small committee that will do the bulk of the work, because it will take someone who likes details and who likes to follow up and be sure that the volunteers and decide who. Is it going to be like, is it going to be the great old piano player? Is it going to be all the elders of the church? Is it going to be, you know, it's up to the local church to decide that. And having a small committee creates an environment where it's that group can do the checking. And then there's one person who would be considered the local administrator, and they would check online to see how far along the volunteer has completed it. They may be 75% through the training, and it does take a little while. If you don't have the time to finish it, you log out, log back in, and pick right back up where you left off. And I can see some of you guys. How many of you have been through the program? I see a hand, 2 hands. Yeah, good. The nice thing is that the conference pays for it. I mean, it is not billed to the local church. It is provided as a free service, and that training is critical and crucial and helpful. And it also helps to provide a culture of awareness, and just we're not always tuned in to some of this stuff. And having gone through it, it is a good program, I think. And what we do is we have the information on our GCC website. So if your church is not currently, if you haven't currently implemented this, talk with your pastor and say, hey, we need to get this going. And all the information, if you go onto our website and go into departments and HR, you'll see the volunteer resources. And I'll give you the website in just a little bit here at the end. So another part of the pie, a piece of the pie of having a solid volunteer program where you're taking care and extra precautions is reference checks. And Adventist Risk Management online, they have an article that says what you should and shouldn't do when checking references. I thought that was kind of cool. It has some sample questions. It has what not to say. And so that is adventistrisk.org. And then you go to, again, I'll share this towards the end, but if you want to just jot that down, I think it's pretty cool, but that is one piece of the puzzle. So you've got the screening and training program, you've got a referencing program, and then you have a ministry volunteer info sheet that's also online. And all of this would be provided as part of what the volunteer screening committee would put together to have a child protection plan in place. And again, on the website, it gives some steps for doing that, that the church board, again, would help set up or get in motion for it to take place in your church. And I hope the majority of you are already in there and already beyond that stage. So moving right along. So it does take time, it does take effort, and it's well worth it, as you know.
Sorry, I just need a little clarification here. Is this, I may have missed this because I got distracted with my kids, but is this separate from the verified volunteer that we do through the conference? Is this something that you're saying we could do in our church independent of that?
Well, the conference for Pathfinders and Adventurers, it has to go through the conference. But what a local church would do would be implement it for the children's ministries. Yes, you would decide, but it's still the same program. It's still logging on to the information, and then the local administrator would have access to see how far along someone is in the training or screening. And yes, this is all part of that. So it sounds like maybe your local church is doing it.
Yeah, we go through the conference, you know, when our times expire, they send us a reminder and we just go ahead and renew.
Yes, so apparently your church has done that. And part of what I'm sharing is that there would be a committee. Hopefully you have a committee at your church who, when there's changes and a new primary leader comes in, that primary leader goes through this process, because there's always, you know, coming and going. And that screening committee would oversee that type of thing. Does that help?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess. I mean, for me at my church, you know, it's easy to just refer them to the conference, verify, volunteer, you know, just fill the info, get the information there.
Right.
We don't have a committee that does this, you know,
Okay.
like monitor people. We just send it off and we make sure that everyone gets it done, and then it comes back to the pastor. That's it.
Yeah, and that making sure that everyone gets it done, that's what I'm referring to. You know, that there's follow-up, and that there may be that part of that process is not just the training and screening, but it's also reference checking and, you know, having that kind of information as part of the process. If it's more than a church can manage, then, you know, understandable. But at least having this piece in place is great. Yes, was there another question, Liz?
Yes, one question. The reference checking will be a different program beside the Sterling volunteers?
Right, Sterling would be just the training and screening, and the reference checking. And if you go onto our website, there's a child protection plan that has some steps, and it has some resources on there that you can see that would guide a committee through the process of setting these types of things up, including the reference checking.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on. So in the Sabbath school room, at the church event, monitoring the behavior of the children, we would suggest developing a protocol so that volunteers are clear about their roles and responsibilities. Sometimes it's pretty vague, and it's hard, again, when you've got so much going on, to add one more thing. But it does help to have clarity on what a volunteer's role would be, and to train those who are working with children. Who do they need to contact if they observe some potential inappropriate or harmful behaviors that are going on? And again, that training with verified volunteers, Sterling volunteers, used to be verified after Shield the Vulnerable. Sterling volunteers is helpful in providing that. Understand boundaries and identify when a line has been crossed. Just knowing if you observe something, talk with the pastor if it's of concern, or if it's something where it needs to go further, by all means, call Child Protective Services. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So boundary violations that we're referring to about is the showing favoritism. You observe an adult who is being a little too friendly, giving gifts, looking for time alone with the youth, and just being tuned in to those types of things. Be prepared to respond immediately to inappropriate behavior, risk situations, and potential boundary violations. So these are just reminders to stay tuned in, and then document that adequate monitoring has occurred. So how to respond to inappropriate behaviors that you see, or potentially. What I think, we did this some time ago. We called in Child Protective Services for the county just to talk with them and have them do a presentation so that they are familiar with us, like our church, and they are familiar with what we're trying to do to provide a safe atmosphere for children. And just connecting with them, I think it probably would be refreshing for them to have someone reach out in a proactive way and wanting to be proactive in protecting the kids and connecting with CPS on counsel from them. They may even be willing to do like a training seminar for the volunteers that work with children in your church. Just a thought. So if in doubt, if you're not sure, just call CPS. If you've seen something or observed something, call them and just say, here's what I've seen. Is this something that would need to be followed up on by CPS? And just track, make a note of when you called, what you shared, what they shared back. Sometimes, depending on the state or the county, they will give you a reference number and you can go back online later and see where the status is. So don't be shy about calling CPS for your county or the county where the behavior occurred. It's not the role of the volunteer or the congregate or the organization or congregation truly to evaluate or investigate an allegation or suspicion as it can harm the youth or the legal investigative process. Now that's it's a lot said there. That's a lot there, but it's not our role. It's the role of CPS. If something has come up, it needs to be turned over to the authorities. So let Child Protective Services, law enforcement, and child advocacy centers do what they're experienced and trained to do. So here's some information on each of our states in the Georgia-Cumberland Conference: North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia. In North Carolina and Tennessee, everyone is a mandated reporter. You are mandated by law to report if you suspect some behavior. And again, you're not supposed to be the expert. You're not supposed to know it all, just if you have a concern. In Georgia, the law is that if you work with children, you are a mandated reporter. So that's a pastor, teachers, Sabbath school leader, VBS leader, virtually anyone that's working with a child, which means a lot of us. So, and then the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline, if you find a need to talk to someone there, it's 800 for a child. You can call that number for guidance and information. And then the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 800-799-SAFE. That's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Just some information there for you. Now, another whole world is if there's a sex offender who has been released from prison and they're on the sex offender registry and they want to attend your church. What do? Well, first and foremost, the safety of the congregation is truly first and foremost. So there's a whole process that the conference has online for our pastors. We work with the pastors through that process. That would not be something that you would take on, but the pastor would work with the church board and with the offender themselves and determine if the church can provide the accountability that would be expected. There are safeguards that would have to be put in place. Basically, anytime that individual, if the church decides, yes, we want them to be able to worship with us, and keep in mind, the church can decide, no, we are not equipped, we do not have the resources to provide that accountability piece. And that basically is that anytime the individual would step onto the property or be at any event sponsored by the church, they would have an accountability partner with them sitting in the pew, going into the restroom, that person is with them the whole time. They are never alone. And there's a lot of other pieces to this part of the puzzle. But there are guidelines that the board can adapt and implement, or again, like I said, they can decline that individual attending at the church. So if they're approved and there's an accountability plan in place, they must sign a participation agreement, and very strict, again, like I mentioned, very strict guidelines on their presence. And then there's a disclosure process where the church is informed. So that's a hard thing to do as well. It's a difficult thing to go through, but to notify, I mean, if we knew that this individual was attending the church, but we had a family who did not know, and they became friends, they invited them to their home, they, a relationship developed, it would be horrific if something happened. So there's a disclosure process where the church is informed of this person's attendance. So again, information is emailed to our pastors and educators. I just wanted you guys to be in the loop and to be aware that this is part of what we try to do to protect our churches and children. So just a few other things in that regard, not specifically about offenders, but just safety in general. To increase the visibility, the exterior landscape should ensure open, visible spaces, have clear lines of sight throughout the building so that there's not an easy hiding place. Secure areas that are not used for programming, be sure you secure those to prevent isolation, like keeping closets and storage rooms locked at all times. And your deacons are, good at that. So just a reminder of these things. Install bright lighting in the areas, and strategize to visually send a message that the program is unified, cohesive, and not permeable to threats. So that takes some work, and you may have a safety committee that's willing to give that some thought and put some time and effort into that. So some additional resources, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm flying through here. It's almost 8 o'clock, and that might give you a little bit more of a break, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to speak up. So gccsda.com, that is where you can go for a lot of information, and just click on departments and ministries and then HR, and that volunteer resources section there will give you quite a bit of info. And then, of course, Adventist risk management. As I mentioned earlier, they have a lot of information on there. If you go to their safety resources and then children and youth and child protection, some of the other, let's see, I've got a couple of them here. So here's one. I don't know if you can see that, but before they volunteer, just a reminder of some of the things we've talked about. And that's where that link is on what you should and shouldn't do on checking references. There's that one. So if it's showing up there or not. Oh, sorry. Just some information, and they don't, they're not long and laborious. They hit the highlights and give you some good reminders. And youth supervision guidelines, this is another one that they have, as well as who's responsible for these kids. So just check those out, and you'll have some great additional resources to help. And the ARM Solutions newsletter, that's what some of those I was just showing you, that before they volunteer is the most recent one that I saw, and that was in January of this year that they posted that. So you can also sign up for the Solutions newsletter. It's free, and I believe it's once a month that you can receive that newsletter. All kinds of great information from them. And then, of course, the Seventh-day Adventist Church Manual has some information on safeguarding children, and that's available at the ABC. I think they may also have that online. You may want to check out the North American Division website. They may have that available. So to wrap it up, I mean, I'm just, maybe because it's a Friday night, everybody's had a long week. There's not a lot of conversation going on here. Let me just read this for you. We wait in hope for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. We are, and I'll give you the verse there. It's Psalm 33:20. And when I read this verse, it was like, you know, the role that you play, I'm assuming in your churches, is with children, protecting children, connecting with children, loving, caring for them, helping them in their life journey. And God bless the children of this day and age, right? Wow, we thought we had it rough. They've got a lot on them, but they rely on us for that help and shield, and we rely on Him, and we point them to Him to be our help and our shield. So any questions, any thoughts that anyone would like to share?
I don't really have a question, but I see these are really good points. I guess since our church is a little smaller, I guess since we all know each other now, we don't, I guess, we don't have like a strict program, but I guess I should discuss that with people about that too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to come across as it being overly cumbersome, you know, and it's important. And in a smaller church, yeah, it's kind of nice because you do know everybody. And we've been told that smaller churches are also a place where predators sometimes go first, because you're always wanting and needing help. Larger churches need that too, with the kids. And so it's just providing some of these protocols really does set the tone for an atmosphere of awareness in a culture where people and newcomers realize right off the bat, okay, well, they're waiting 6 months before they're putting me into anything. So that means they're careful, you know, they're taking extra precautions. So yeah, maybe that will help ease the burden of what this may have come across as, but yeah. Anyone else?
So how long does it take for someone new to volunteer at the church again? Was it
Yeah,
6 months?
6 months. Yeah, the recommendation is at least 6 months, and some churches wait longer, you know, give it a
Okay.
year. So it's not a cut and dried type thing. It's just whatever your church feels is best, but the minimum would be 6 months. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And that's, you know, that's another thing where the referencing comes in handy. You don't know this person, they may be just a godsend for the kids in your congregation. But you could reference with the prior church or with their prior location and just check into it and see, hey, let's find out a little bit more. Anyone else?
I just wanted to share something. I remember when I first came to my current church, almost 15, 16 years ago, they had to get a reference because I was involved with Pathfinder both in Africa and the United Kingdom. So they had to basically get reference from my previous church pastors to make sure that it was okay for me to work with children. And I also brought in my own younger children into the church. So
Wow.
everything works well for everybody.
Yeah. So way back then, they were being careful. Yeah.
Yes.
Checking you out.
Yes.
And look, you're still in it. You're in it.
Yes, because I told them I was master guide.
Oh,
And
yeah.
of course, I did in the transit of moving from continent to continent. I didn't have all the things I should to show them. So I end up giving them my pastor's name, how to get hold of them. And they went ahead and asked questions and got back to me that was okay.
That's so cool. Yes, because the screening and the background checks through Sterling Volunteers, it's just United States. So for someone coming in like that, they did the best thing, to reach out to your prior pastors. That's awesome. It's a great idea. Any other things that you would like to share that have worked in your congregation? Maybe you guys have seen and been through some of these setups with a screening committee, or have some words of wisdom to share with the group.
I had a question. Do you have any resources that we could use to check kids in, like for a VBS program, or some program where you're having children from the community come in?
I saw, yes, on that one I mentioned, they have some practical, this is the one, who is responsible for these kids. It says practical tips to consider, create a check-in, check-out policy. And I did not go there, but it does have a link. So yes, that is on the adventistrisk.org website.
Okay.
And you should be able to get some, it says the policy, create a check-in, check-out policy that includes trained staff, drop-off and pickup points, permissions, emergency contact info, and authorized, says audits. I think that's adults. Might be a typo here. Define check-in and check-out method and emergency response plan. So, and then it does talk about the child protection plan down below that we've mentioned earlier. So yeah, you could check that out.
Thank you.
Looks like they've got some good stuff there. Any other words of
And
wisdom?
one question. In case, because for example, in my case, I am helping, I'm new helping as a coordinator of the children ministry. So I'm also new about all these things. But for example, if we have programs like a VBS and we don't have many volunteers and something the parents help us out, do everyone has to go through this background check? Even though, for example, they don't help us all the time, but for specific activities like a VBS once a year, every volunteer that helps in that, they have to go to the Sterling volunteer?
That is what we recommend. But like I said earlier, the church board or the committee, the volunteer screening committee that they authorize would decide. But yes, for VBS, we would definitely recommend that everyone who is involved would be going online and going through the process. Yes, absolutely. But again,
and for example,
yeah, that committee would determine that. The local church decides that. The conference would not decide that.
So in case, for example, because it's just one case of one lady, she's been going to the church for many years. I think she doesn't like too much about technology and doing, this online. And she was like, no, Liz, I can help you, but I don't want to do this. And she's very good with kids. She just doesn't like this kind of technology. And she's like, no, I don't really want to do this. So in that case, that someone kind of refused it, but she's been she's known by the church for many years, and she has been working with kids, I guess, without doing this, because I'm new, so I guess she never did before. It's something that the church board meeting would decide she still can continue working with kids, even though she doesn't do this Sterling volunteer program?
We have been told that it's really, it sends a sign, a signal, if someone refuses to do it. Not that they would be someone who would abuse a child, no, but if they're not willing to abide by the protocols that have been set up, it needs to be someone that would, you'd have to work with them in a gentle and loving way. And like you were saying, even sitting down with her at the computer where you're doing the technology part of it and then walking her through it. But when this first came out, there was a lot of pushback at various churches where people were saying, "You're kidding me. I have been doing this for 40 years and nothing's happened, and I'm really good at what I do. So why in the world are you questioning or telling me I need to be trained?" So there is that type of attitude there. And I haven't heard much of it, in recent years, but early on for sure. So our recommendation is that the pastor would work with you, or the volunteer screening committee, would lovingly and encouragingly help her go through the process and try to give the explanation of why it's so important. And that she is filling a role that is one of the roles that the committee has chosen to have screened. And it doesn't mean that you don't trust her. It just means that you're following a process that's across the board.
Thank you.
Tough. Yeah, it's a tough conversation. But prayerfully, the Holy Spirit, praying for his intercession and softening the heart. And typically it works out. Any other thoughts, comments?
I'm just thinking, isn't that something the pastor should do? Like talk to her about it? Because if she's refusing, that is like out of the coordinator's hand. Isn't that something you go up the?
Yeah, the pastor would definitely need to be part of the conversation. And whoever, each church has its own dynamics, and the best way to handle maybe someone who has worked with her for years, or but definitely bringing the pastor into that conversation.
It should be a chain of command.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else? Anything else? Something that's worked at your church or like to share? Okay, well, Linda, thank you for hosting us. And do you have any other announcements for the group?
Yes, thank you very much, Connie. That was excellent. Very well done. Thank you. And if everybody would just stay on in this room, they will move you for the general session. But there'll be a few things, a few videos that they'll start playing a little bit before 8:45. But then at 8:45, you'll be moved into the general session. So you can just take a little break, go get something to eat or some water or something, and then they'll be moving you at that time.
Thank you all. See you later. Have a great evening and a great weekend. Looks like it's going to be an awesome program. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.